Last week's video was all about removing performance ratings, and as you might imagine, that's led to quite a few questions online. So what I thought I'd do today is to take some of those questions and give you a few responses in terms of what we're testing and moving along with at Cisco, and see in doing that if I can answer some of the concerns that seem to be surfacing in this discussion. So let me give you a flavor of some of the questions, and in fact there's a sort of theme behind all of them, so I'm going to sort of try and do a macro answer, I think, here. Simon asks, has this shift, removing performance ratings, has this shift impaired Cisco's ability to leverage big data on individual performance? Jennifer says, how do you account for or manage around the potential biases of a leader without performance ratings? Rick says, how do you aggregate the performance of individuals over the course of the year? How do you make decisions on discretionary spending or employee development, for example? And Salette says, you mentioned the Cisco approach resulted in good data. Can you elaborate on that? What kind of data is more useful than the ratings or scores, than performance ratings or scores? So maybe starting with that last one, what kind of data is more useful than performance ratings data? Almost any sort of data is actually the answer to that. And if you want to know why in much more detail, check out Chapter 6 of 9 Lies About Work, where Marcus and I go into some depth on the problems with rating data, whether that's performance ratings, 9-box ratings, potential ratings, the problems with those sources of, and I have to give it the little scare quotes, those sources of data, in terms of the fact that they don't actually measure reliably anything at all, and that we shouldn't therefore rely on them as a source of data in organizations, and all of the problems that leads to, which is, by the way, not merely an esoteric concern of data science, if you like, although those sorts of things in a big data world full of algorithms should certainly bother us. But it's also to reflect that when somebody tells you, sits you down and says, by the way, we all had a meeting, you weren't invited, and this is the number that we decided to affix to you, and you go, that's not me, to just acknowledge that actually that reaction is not completely unreasonable. It's not you, it's somebody else's weird judgment of you, and that's a suspicious thing. So how to get to good data on this? Well, here's where we're going, and we've gone some way to this, and I think we've got further to go at Cisco. What you learn about as you get into the question of data is that if I evaluate you, I generate bad data. If I report on me, my emotion, my future intent, things that are contained within me, I generate good data, reliable data. And reliable meaning that if my emotions or future intents change, I will report that, and so I'm actually measuring the state of something inside of me. So what you do is, instead of saying give people a number, which is your assessment of them, and the number, as we saw in the video, is a way to figure out who to invest in, who to move, you just go directly to the choice at the end, and you make the choices all discrete, and then you give people options in technology, and then you count the answers. That's essentially what you do. So instead of assessment, we are trying to count investment. Here's what that looks like. At the moment, we say once a quarter or so with all of our team leaders, how do you want to invest in this person? Do you want to invest in their movement in the organization? If yes, then here are some options. Do you want to invest in their development in the organization? If yes, then here are some options. Do you want to invest in their compensation and rewards? If yes, then here are some options. And the manager goes through and goes, here's what I would do with this person. Okay, those are my choices. Good data, my intent. If my intent changes, I'll change my choices. What we talk about in a talent review is those choices. So instead of, somebody was asking in one of the comments, or somebody made the point that in the old days there was always this moment where you had to justify the number. Justify the number being a thing you do in a consensus meeting, of course, where everybody sits around and goes, look, we've run out of 4s, but you've given Becky a 4, so justify the number. And you'd have to go, well, here are the 3s and she's better than those, and here are the 5s and she's not as good as those, and so we need to go look around and look under the couch and see if we've got any 4s left, because I've got to justify a 4 for Becky. Much better conversation, and by the way, a much less surreal conversation, is justify the investment. Why do you think you would promote this person over somebody else? Why do you think you would invest in a coach or training for this person rather than somebody else? Why would you prioritize this person for bonus dollars above somebody else? Justify the action. We've been digitizing the wrong thing. We've been digitizing judgment in a wonky data way. We need to digitize the intentions of managers with respect to their people in a good data way and talk about that. And of course, then what you get is, then you can add all of those things up and you can see the patterns of not performance, whatever that is, but you can see the patterns of manager intention, manager judgment in your organization, which is actually, when you think about it, a little bit more important than performance. Performance is a very, very abstract thing that we sort of get confused. Is it the same as being a good chap? Is it the same as bringing results now? Is it the same as bringing results later? Is it the same as looking like your boss? Is it the same as executive presence? I mean, ask anybody to define it, and all of a sudden you realize that a performance rating, part of the problem is rating, the other problem is no one can agree on what performance actually is on any given day. But we can all agree on how team leaders intend to invest in people. So I think that's where we need to go. Certainly that's what we are trying to build at Cisco. And what happens from all of this is, okay, you can talk about the investments. Also, you find that there are many, many ways for a team leader to invest in a team member that aren't zero sum, that you can just keep on doing. So we're now experimenting with giving the team member a chance to ask about how they would like to be invested in, and some of them are pay me more frequent attention. Some of them are help me reset expectations because I think we're off. So by giving the team member a voice in all of this, we can then also begin to have them express their wishes about development and include in our data things that are, you might call them sort of coaching activities, but all we're doing is pulling apart how you actually care for a human being and help a human being on a team. And we're digitizing that through this lens of not how do we assess you, but how do we invest in you. And a few of the questions sort of then turned around to, well, how are you getting by because you've given up data? I hope what's clear from this response is that we're not giving up good data. We never had good data with ratings. We're trying to have, for the first time, good data on our people. We're not giving up accuracy. There was nothing remotely accurate about performance ratings, and there never has been. We are gaining accuracy by measuring, by focusing our energies on something that we can measure accurately, the future intent of our team leaders. We're at, somebody said, well, how do you deal with bias? We're at no more risk of bias than we were with performance ratings, and goodness me, those things have all sorts of room for bias inside them. In fact, we're now arguably at less risk for bias because we can actually get detailed on what the investments are rather than the vagueness of a 3 versus a 4 and whether we can justify a 3 versus a 4 in terms of bias in some way. And the net of all of this, if we get it right, is that we'll be talking about our people as we would talk about them anyway in the real world if performance ratings had never existed. If the world had never stumbled upon this idea of putting numbers on people's foreheads, I don't think we would necessarily invent it. I think what we'd say, if we were putting together a team of people and trying to figure out how to spread out our investments of time and attention across those people, I think we'd say to each person's team leader, what would you do? What would you do? What do you think is important for this person? You work with them closely, you see them every day, you probably have the best vantage point of everybody in terms of deciding how we should help them. What would you do? And then we'd add that up, and then we'd look at it together, and then we'd make our decisions together. And the world wouldn't be a perfect place because of that, but it would at least be a place that was paying attention to the best sources of information that we can get, as humbly as possible, as authentically as possible, and as transparently as possible, which can't, in the end, be a bad thing.